For most of the history of life on Earth, the sky belonged to things we have never fully understood. Not birds as we know them, not the neat two-winged feathered creatures that fill the air today. Something that came before, something in between, that filled a chapter of evolutionary history so brief and so strange that for a long time scientists were not sure what to make of the fossils at all. When the first specimen was found, the feathers on its hind limbs were so well preserved that researchers initially assumed they were looking at contamination, an error, some kind of preservation artifact, because what the fossil was suggesting, a predator with four functioning wings, not two, did not fit any model of how flight was supposed to work or how it was supposed to have evolved. It was not an error. In the forests of the early Cretaceous, there were predators moving through the canopy on four wings, feathered from head to tail, capable of something between gliding and powered flight that modern aerodynamics has still not fully reconstructed. Today, we are going back to the Cretaceous forest to meet the four-winged hunters that ruled the skies. Geography often decides what survives. Entire worlds can flourish, disappear, and leave almost nothing behind, while another landscape preserves its inhabitants with such fidelity that even the finest traces of their bodies endure across immense spans of time. Northeastern China became one of those rare places. Within the rocks of Liaoning province lies a record so detailed that it captures moments of Cretaceous life with an intimacy usually reserved for the recent past. Between roughly 130 and 120 million years ago, the region formed part of a broad peninsula extending toward an inland sea. Volcanoes dotted the surrounding terrain, their activity woven into everyday existence. Forests of conifers and ginkgos stretched across the landscape, shaped by seasons that brought cold winters followed by warm, dry summers. Streams wound toward lakes, scattered through the lowlands, creating a patchwork of habitats occupied by creatures of every size. Life flourished across these environments. Insects moved among the vegetation, salamanders drifted through freshwater shallows, fish occupied lakes rich with nutrients carried from surrounding slopes, feathered animals appeared almost everywhere. Some remained bound to the ground, others climbed trunks and branches, and many spent at least part of their lives in the air. Looking across the ecosystem, familiar categories begin to lose their sharp edges. The distinction between bird and dinosaur had already become difficult to draw. Above this thriving community stood the forces that would ultimately preserve it. Periodic eruptions sent ash high into the atmosphere before gravity returned it to the forests below. On certain occasions, far more destructive events occurred. Pyroclastic flows raced across the terrain, carrying scorching mixtures of gas, ash, and fragmented rock. Entire local communities could vanish within a matter of minutes. Such destruction created extraordinary opportunities for preservation. Organisms buried rapidly were shielded from scavengers, weathering, and many of the processes that normally erase biological detail. Fine volcanic sediments settled around bodies with remarkable precision. Feathers remained intact. Delicate tissues left impressions. Stomach contents stayed where they had been at the moment of death. A study published in 2014 compared this process to the famous burial of Pompeii, emphasizing the speed with which living communities were entombed. The deposits that accumulated through these events form what scientists call the Jehol biota, spanning approximately 10 million years across the Yixian and Jufotang formations. Layer after layer preserved a changing ecosystem while maintaining astonishing detail. Early birds, pterosaurs, mammals, amphibians, feathered dinosaurs, flowering plants, and countless invertebrates emerged from these rocks. Each discovery adding another piece to a larger ecological portrait. Among the most extraordinary features of gel fossils is the survival of microscopic structures. Researchers have recovered details from individual feather filaments, and in some cases, structures within cells themselves. Such preservation is exceptionally rare in the fossil record and has transformed understanding of how dinosaurs lived, moved, fed, and appeared in life. Microraptor belonged to this world. The ash that ended its journey became part of the geological archive that carried its story forward, preserving details so precise that 120 million years later, they still remain waiting within the stone. Scientific revolutions often arrive in modest forms: a few pages in a journal, a handful of specimens, a description written with careful language. Then, years later, it becomes clear that a boundary had been crossed. One such moment arrived on January 23rd, 2003, when a paper appeared in Nature bearing the title Four Winged Dinosaurs from China. The authors were led by Chinese paleontologist Xu Xing, whose work had already become closely associated with the growing wave of feathered dinosaur discoveries emerging from northeastern China. The paper described six specimens collected between 2001 and 2002 from sites within the Chaoyang Basin of western Liaoning. Among them was a small animal that would soon become one of the most discussed dinosaurs ever discovered. It received the name Microraptor Gu, honoring the respected Chinese paleontologist Gu Jiwei. At first glance, the fossil seemed to belong within a familiar pattern. The skeleton carried many traits associated with dromaeosaurids, the group that included famous predators such as Velociraptor. Its body was compact, its jaws armed with teeth, and its ancestry firmly rooted among theropod dinosaurs. Then attention shifted to the feathers. Researchers had already become accustomed to finding feathers attached to dinosaur forelimbs. That idea, controversial only a few years earlier, was rapidly becoming accepted. What appeared on Microraptor went far beyond that expectation. Long pennaceous feathers extended from the hind limbs as well. They were not short tufts or decorative coverings. They formed broad surfaces with a clear aerodynamic appearance. Even more significant was their structure. The feathers displayed asymmetry between the veins on either side of the shaft, a feature strongly associated with flight feathers in living birds. Such asymmetry influences airflow and lift generation. Finding these feathers on the legs transformed the entire interpretation of the animal. The hind limbs were no longer viewed merely as legs, they appeared capable of functioning as additional wings. Xu Xing described the animal as a four-winged dinosaur and proposed that all four limbs contributed to aerial movement. The phrase spread rapidly through scientific circles and beyond them. Within a short period, illustrations of feathered dinosaurs began to change. Museums, textbooks, and documentaries suddenly had a new image to consider, one that challenged assumptions that had existed for generations. Discussion followed almost immediately. Paul Sereno of the University of Chicago referred to the publication as a landmark paper, while noting that its broader evolutionary implications would generate intense debate. The central question concerned whether the four-winged arrangement represented a stage through which the ancestors of modern birds had once passed, or whether it reflected a specialized pathway unique to a separate lineage. That uncertainty became part of the discovery's importance. The fossil did not offer a tidy answer. It complicated a narrative that many researchers had begun to simplify. Instead of presenting flight evolution as a straightforward progression, Microraptor suggested a landscape filled with experimentation, where multiple body plans explored the possibilities offered by feathers and air. For Su Xing, the paper became another milestone in a career defined by extraordinary fossils. For paleontology as a whole, it opened a chapter few had anticipated, revealing that the history of flight contained forms stranger and more inventive than anyone had imagined only a decade earlier. Family relationships can be deceptive. Place the skeleton of Microraptor beside that of Velociraptor, and certain similarities become impossible to miss. The curved killing claw, the lightly built frame, the predatory skull, all point toward a shared ancestry within the dromaeosaurid family. Yet the resemblance fades quickly once their lives are imagined in motion. These relatives occupied worlds that demanded entirely different solutions. Velociraptor belonged to the late Cretaceous landscapes of Mongolia, where open terrain rewarded speed, pursuit, and efficient movement across the ground. Microraptor emerged much earlier, inhabiting forests where vertical space mattered as much as horizontal distance. Every aspect of its anatomy reflects that setting. Its body was built for a three-dimensional environment of trunks, branches, gaps, and perches. The animal itself was modest in size. Most estimates place its mass at roughly 1 kilogram, with a total body length of around 77 centimeters from the tip of the snout to the end of the tail. A modern observer might compare it to a crow or large pigeon. That comparison captures its scale, though little else. Unlike modern birds, Microraptor still carried the unmistakable features of a small predatory dinosaur. Its feet provide some of the clearest evidence of how it moved through the world. The claws were strongly curved, exhibiting proportions commonly associated with climbing animals. Studies comparing claw curvature across living species found that Microraptor aligned more closely with perching birds than with terrestrial hunters. Such claws function like natural grappling hooks, gripping bark and uneven surfaces with efficiency. Movement along the ground appears to have occupied a secondary role. Long feathers extended from the hind limbs, creating structures that would have complicated rapid running. A body optimized for sprinting usually reduces anything that risks snagging vegetation or interfering with leg motion. Microraptor followed a different path. Its feathers suggest that movement through branches carried greater importance than efficient travel across open terrain. The forelimbs reveal a similar pattern. Relative to body size, the arms were unusually long, approaching proportions seen in Archaeopteryx and other early feathered flyers. Length alone does not create flight, though it expands the aerodynamic possibilities available to an animal. Combined with feathered surfaces, these limbs formed broad structures capable of interacting with air in ways uncommon among non-avian dinosaurs. Its skull balanced delicacy with function. The jaws contained numerous small teeth edged with fine serrations, each tooth curved slightly backward, a useful shape for securing struggling prey. Large eye sockets occupied a substantial portion of the skull, indicating a strong reliance on vision. Among branches crowded with obstacles and opportunities, accurate depth perception would have been valuable. Taken together, these traits form a coherent picture. Microraptor was neither a miniature version of Velociraptor nor an imperfect bird awaiting further evolution. It occupied a distinct ecological role, shaped by the architecture of forests. Curved claws connected it to bark and branches. Extended limbs interacted with air. Sharp teeth handled prey, encountered among leaves and trunks. Within the dromaeosaurid family tree, Microraptor stands as evidence that close relatives can follow strikingly different paths. Shared ancestry provided the foundation, while environment guided the details, producing a predator whose life unfolded high above the forest floor. Few fossils force researchers to rethink an entire body plan at a glance. Microraptor belongs to that rare category. The skeleton itself was intriguing, Yet it was the arrangement of the feathers that transformed the animal from an unusual dinosaur into something that seemed to challenge familiar rules of anatomy. Every new specimen revealed the same unexpected pattern. Flight surfaces appeared where no one expected them. The feathers covering the forelimbs possessed a form that immediately attracted attention. They were pennaceous, meaning each feather carried a central shaft with interlocking veins extending outward. More importantly, those veins were asymmetrical. One side was narrower than the other, matching the architecture seen in the flight feathers of living birds. Such asymmetry influences how air moves across the feather during motion and is widely regarded as one of the strongest indicators that a feather played an aerodynamic role. If the story ended there, Microraptor would still have been noteworthy. The true surprise emerged from the hind limbs. Long pennaceous feathers extended from the lower legs and feet, attached along the metatarsal bones. These feathers mirrored the aerodynamic design seen on the forelimbs and formed broad surfaces that projected outward from the body. Viewed as a whole, the animal appeared equipped with two additional wings positioned behind the primary pair. Measurements reported in Shuxing's original description showed that some hind limb feathers reached approximately 18 centimeters in length. For an animal weighing around 1 kilogram, those structures represented a substantial portion of its overall aerodynamic profile. They were far too large to dismiss as decoration or insulation alone. Their presence demanded an explanation linked to movement through the air. The tail added another layer to this arrangement. Extending behind the body was a long series of vertebrae supporting prominent feathers. Together, they formed an additional aerodynamic surface that interacted with airflow generated by the limbs. In the broadest sense, Microraptor possessed five feathered structures capable of influencing aerial performance: two forelimb wings, two hindlimb wings, and a feathered tail. Nothing alive today carries this exact configuration. Modern birds concentrate flight surfaces almost entirely on the forelimbs, while the legs remain comparatively free of large aerodynamic feathers. Microraptor followed a different blueprint, one that persisted long enough to become successful, yet eventually disappeared from the living world. Its fossils preserve evidence of an evolutionary experiment, unlike any surviving design. That unusual arrangement sparked one of the most enduring debates surrounding the animal. Determining how the hind wings were positioned during flight proved difficult because fossils preserve anatomy in flattened form. Researchers proposed several possibilities. Some envisioned the legs extending outward to the sides, creating a stacked wing arrangement reminiscent of two levels of lifting surfaces. Others reconstructed the hind limbs lower beneath the body, while additional interpretations placed them in positions somewhere between those extremes. Each reconstruction altered airflow patterns in different ways. Lift, stability, drag, and maneuverability all depended upon the orientation of those feathered legs. As a result, discussions about Microraptor extended beyond paleontology into aerodynamics and biomechanics. The fossil offered more than a description of an extinct animal. It provided a puzzle, preserved in stone, whose solution required understanding how feathers, bones, and air once worked together as a single integrated system. Fossils preserve shape, texture, and structure, yet they cannot directly show movement. Bones reveal where muscles attached. Feathers record patterns and proportions. The air that once flowed around an animal is gone. To understand how Microraptor traveled through that missing medium, researchers needed a different approach. They decided to build the dinosaur again. In 2013, a team from the University of Southampton created a detailed physical model based on fossil evidence and placed it inside a wind tunnel. The work, published in Nature Communications, transformed a long-standing debate into something measurable. Instead of relying solely on skeletal interpretation, scientists could observe how reconstructed body forms behaved when exposed to controlled airflow. Several possible flight postures were tested. One arrangement spread the hind limbs outward, another positioned the legs beneath the body, a third aligned them closer to the tail. Additional configurations explored combinations of these positions. Each represented a plausible interpretation of how the feathered limbs may have been held during aerial movement. As air passed over the model, instruments measured lift, drag, and stability. These values determine how effectively an animal remains aloft and how predictably it behaves while moving through the atmosphere. Modern birds that travel great distances generally favor aerodynamic efficiency, reducing drag whenever possible. Microraptor revealed a different pattern. The model performed best when generating substantial lift, even though that came with considerable drag. In aerodynamic terms, drag acts as resistance, slowing forward motion. Efficient, soaring animals often minimize it. Microraptor appeared willing to accept that cost. Stability and control emerged as more important priorities than covering large distances. Such characteristics fit naturally within a forest environment. An animal moving between nearby perches benefits from maintaining altitude while traveling at relatively modest speeds. Losing too much height during a glide would shorten travel options and increase the need to climb repeatedly. A high-lift strategy helps preserve elevation and allows careful movement through spaces crowded with branches and trunks. One outcome surprised many researchers. Differences in hind limb position, though important in appearance, produced smaller performance changes than expected. Aerodynamic behavior remained broadly similar across several plausible postures. The famous question of exactly how the hindwings were arranged during flight turned out to have less influence than earlier discussions suggested. This finding carried broader implications. It indicated that successful gliding did not require the precision seen in modern bird wings. Contemporary flying birds possess highly refined feather arrangements shaped by millions of years of evolutionary adjustment. Microraptor functioned effectively without reaching that level of specialization. Airflow at the speeds and conditions it experienced proved forgiving enough to accommodate a range of anatomical positions. Researchers connected this observation to a larger idea concerning feather evolution. If aerodynamic performance remained viable without extreme precision, then feathers could have acquired flight-related functions before becoming highly optimized flight structures. Traits that originally evolved for insulation, display, or other purposes may have provided useful aerodynamic benefits long before powered flight reached its modern form. Estimated gliding speeds placed Microraptor within the range observed among living birds. The mechanics remained primitive in comparison with advanced avian flight, yet the overall performance was recognizably effective. For brief journeys through the canopy, the reconstructed dinosaur behaved less like an awkward experiment and more like an animal operating comfortably within the physical limits of its world. Across the history of flight, certain shapes appear more than once. They emerge in feathers, fabric, wood, aluminum, and carbon fiber, separated by millions of years yet linked by the same physical laws. In 2007, paleontologist Sankar Chatterjee and aerospace engineer R.J. Templin proposed that Microraptor belonged to one of those recurring patterns. Their study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, drew an unexpected comparison between a small Cretaceous predator and the first successful powered aircraft built by the Wright brothers. The idea centered on wing arrangement. Chatterjee and Templin argued that the hindlimb wings were positioned below and slightly behind the forelimb wings. Viewed from the side, the animal would have possessed two stacked aerodynamic surfaces. Engineers refer to this configuration as a biplane, a design once common during the earliest decades of aviation. The Wright Flyer of 1903 used that same principle. Its upper and lower wings worked together to generate lift while maintaining structural simplicity. Chatterjee and Templin suggested that Microraptor may have exploited a comparable strategy, though through biological evolution rather than engineering design. The comparison captured attention because it transformed the animal from a feathered dinosaur into something resembling a naturally evolved aircraft. Computer simulations formed the foundation of their analysis. These models explored how air would move around the reconstructed body during gliding. Results indicated that the arrangement could support a style of movement known as phugoid gliding. In this pattern, an animal alternates between descending and climbing phases, converting altitude into speed and then speed back into altitude. Instead of maintaining a perfectly level path, it travels through a sequence of gentle oscillations. Within a forest environment, such movement carries advantages. Small adjustments in pitch allow a glider to navigate changing elevations while conserving energy. Chatterjee and Templin proposed that the feathered tail acted as a control surface during these maneuvers, helping regulate the animal's orientation through the air. Their interpretation generated discussion almost immediately. Skeptics focused on anatomy. The biplane model required the hind limbs to extend laterally to a significant degree, creating broad separation between the upper and lower wing surfaces. Some researchers questioned whether the hip joints of dromaeosaurids permitted that posture comfortably. Alternative reconstructions placed the legs in more downward-facing positions, producing different aerodynamic relationships. As additional studies accumulated, the debate shifted from whether the hind wings mattered to precisely how they contributed. Advances in computational methods allowed increasingly detailed examinations of airflow around reconstructed bodies. A study published in 2026 employed computational fluid dynamics to investigate the issue further. Rather than concentrating solely on overall lift, researchers examined smaller aerodynamic effects occurring along the wing surfaces. The hindwings produced complex airflow structures, including leading-edge vortices that developed at high angles of attack. Such vortices can enhance lift and improve stability under certain conditions. Their presence suggested that the rear wings were not passive appendages. They actively participated in shaping aerodynamic performance. The details remain subjects of ongoing discussion, yet a broader conclusion has endured. Microraptor functioned through cooperation between multiple feathered surfaces, working together as an integrated system. Whether described as a biological biplane or by another label, its method of aerial movement occupied a region of design space unlike anything represented among living birds. The skies of the early Cretaceous accommodated solutions that later disappeared, leaving only fossils and airflow equations to reveal how they once worked. Predators are often known through inference. Teeth suggest what they could eat. Jaw mechanics hint at preferred prey. Limb proportions imply hunting strategies. Direct evidence is rare. For most dinosaurs, the menu must be reconstructed from clues scattered across anatomy and environment. Microraptor offers something far more unusual. It left behind meals, still preserved inside its body. Across hundreds of known specimens, 4 individuals have yielded unmistakable gut contents. Each fossil captured a different feeding event. Together, they provide a dietary record unmatched by any other dinosaur species. Instead of speculation, paleontologists can examine actual prey remains carried within the animal at the moment of death. One specimen contained the remains of a fish. The prey was substantial, large enough that some of its rib bones approached the size of Microraptor's own ribs. This was not the remains of a tiny morsel gathered opportunistically. It represented a significant capture, demonstrating that the predator could handle prey approaching its own scale. Such evidence broadens the picture of where Microraptor searched for food, linking it not only to branches and trunks, but also to aquatic habitats nearby. Another specimen revealed a very different meal. Preserved within the abdominal cavity were the remains of an adult enantiornithine bird. Parts of the skeleton remained articulated, including a wing and both feet. Their arrangement indicated that the prey had entered the digestive tract head first. The position was strikingly similar to feeding patterns observed among many modern predatory birds. A third discovery added another layer to the story. This specimen contained an entire lizard preserved within the rib cage. The skeleton remained largely intact and retained its anatomical orientation. Like the bird, it had been swallowed head first. Researchers later determined that the lizard represented a species previously unknown to science. A predator and a newly discovered prey species had been preserved together in a single fossil. The fourth dietary record was smaller in size, yet equally important. Inside a specimen of Microraptor zhauianus, scientists identified the foot of a mammal approximately mouse-sized. Estimates suggested the prey weighed around 10% of the predator's own body mass. Although fragmentary, the remains provided direct evidence that mammals also formed part of the diet. Viewed together, these fossils reveal an extraordinary pattern. Fish, birds, lizards, and mammals occupied different parts of the ecosystem and required different hunting opportunities. Few predators specialize successfully across such a range. Microraptor appears to have taken advantage of whatever suitable prey became available within reach. Paleontologist Scott Persons described the animal as a generalist predator, one willing to pursue almost anything small enough to fit inside its mouth. The fossil record supports that interpretation. Each preserved meal expands the ecological portrait of the species, showing flexibility instead of narrow specialization. The head-first swallowing behavior adds further insight. Among living raptorial birds, prey is commonly oriented in this manner because it reduces resistance from limbs, wings, or scales during ingestion. Microraptor employed the same strategy more than 120 million years before hawks, falcons, and eagles evolved into their modern forms. Within the stone, these meals remain frozen at the end of digestion, but at the beginning of discovery. Together, they reveal a hunter capable of moving through multiple layers of its environment, taking prey from water, ground, and canopy with equal readiness. Among all the fossils associated with Microraptor, one specimen carries an unusual sense of immediacy. Many discoveries reveal anatomy, others reveal behavior. This fossil preserves an interaction between two flying animals that ended more than 120 million years ago and remained frozen long enough for paleontologists to reconstruct the final moments with surprising clarity. The specimen was described in 2011 by Jingmai O'Connor and colleagues in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Inside the abdominal cavity of a Microraptor lay the remains of another creature, an adult enantiornithine bird. The preservation was extraordinary. Portions of the prey remained articulated, meaning the bones still occupied their natural positions relative to one another. The left wing and both feet were especially well preserved, offering important clues about how the animal had been consumed. Their orientation proved significant. The preserved elements pointed toward the predator's hips, a configuration consistent with the bird having entered the digestive tract head first. Modern raptorial birds frequently swallow prey in the same manner. Wings, legs, and feathers fold more efficiently when aligned with the direction of ingestion, reducing resistance during swallowing. The fossil suggested a feeding behavior strikingly familiar despite the immense span of time separating Microraptor from today's avian hunters. Identification of the prey added another dimension. The bird belonged to the Enantiornithes, a highly successful group that flourished throughout much of the Cretaceous period. These birds possess teeth and skeletal features distinct from those of modern avian lineages. Fossil discoveries indicate that they occupied numerous ecological roles and were among the most common flying vertebrates in many early Cretaceous ecosystems. Their lifestyle carried particular importance. Evidence from claws, limb proportions, and other anatomical features indicates that many enantiornithines spent much of their lives among branches. They were animals of the canopy, adapted to moving through elevated parts of the forest. Finding one inside Microraptor transformed discussions about the predator's ecology. Prior evidence had already suggested that Microraptor climbed effectively and spent considerable time above ground. The bird specimen provided direct confirmation that hunting occurred in those elevated environments. This was not merely an animal launching from trees, it was actively searching for prey within the same spaces occupied by arboreal birds. One fossil therefore yielded several independent conclusions simultaneously. It demonstrated that birds formed part of the diet. It strengthened evidence for a life closely tied to trees. It confirmed ecological interactions between feathered, non-avian dinosaurs and birds during a period when both groups shared the same habitats. The discovery also illuminated the complexity of early Cretaceous food webs. Popular portrayals often present dinosaurs and birds as separate chapters in evolutionary history, one replacing the other in sequence. The fossil reveals a more intricate reality. These animals lived together, competed for resources, and occasionally occupied opposite sides of a predator-prey relationship. For researchers studying the evolution of birds, the specimen carried additional significance. Here was a dromaeosaurid dinosaur consuming a member of a bird lineage that had already become widespread and successful. Evolutionary relationships remained important, yet ecology operated according to immediate realities. Wings, feathers, and shared ancestry offered no protection from a predator capable of navigating the same branches and striking within the same forest air. Names often arrive at the end of a scientific discovery. Researchers uncover a specimen, examine its anatomy, compare it with known species, and only then decide what it should be called. In one unusual case, a predator's final meal carried a name that linked paleontology, mythology, and ecology into a single story preserved inside stone. The fossil came to wider attention in 2019 through a study published in Current Biology. Among the known dietary specimens of Microraptor, this individual stood apart. Preserved within its body cavity was an entire lizard. Unlike fragmentary remains or scattered bones, the prey survived in an almost complete state, offering an exceptionally detailed glimpse into a feeding event that occurred more than 120 million years ago. The position of the skeleton immediately drew attention. Vertebrae, limbs, ribs, and skull elements remained closely associated with one another, preserving the lizard's original anatomical arrangement. Such preservation indicated that the animal had been swallowed whole. Its orientation within the digestive tract showed that the head entered first, a pattern already emerging from other Microraptor gut content discoveries. Head-first ingestion is a practical solution for predators dealing with prey that possesses limbs, claws, scales, or feathers. Entering the digestive tract in that direction reduces resistance and lowers the risk of appendages catching during swallowing. Many living carnivorous reptiles employ the same strategy, as do numerous birds that consume vertebrate prey. The fossil therefore preserved not only the prey itself, but also evidence of feeding behavior. Closer examination revealed another surprise. The lizard did not belong to any previously described species. Features of the skull and dentition differed from those known among other reptiles recovered from the Jahal ecosystem. Researchers recognized that they were looking at a new species entirely, one that had remained unknown until its encounter with Microraptor delivered it into the fossil record. The animal received the name Indrosaurus wongi. The choice carried an unusual literary dimension. In Vedic mythology, the deity Indra battles a dragon associated with swallowing and cosmic conflict. The name deliberately inverted that narrative. Here, the reptilian creature occupied the role of the swallowed figure, preserved within the body of a feathered predator that served as the dragon in this paleontological retelling. Beyond its name, Indrosaurus contributed valuable ecological information. Its teeth differed from those of other lizards known from the region, suggesting a distinctive feeding strategy and a specialized role within the broader ecosystem. Every new species recovered from Jahol helps clarify how resources were divided among animals sharing the same landscape. The lizard's presence added another thread to that intricate network. For Microraptor, the discovery strengthened an emerging pattern. Fish pointed toward aquatic hunting opportunities. Birds connected the predator to the canopy. Mammalian remains demonstrated exploitation of terrestrial prey. The lizard expanded that range further, confirming that the predator moved through ecological boundaries with unusual flexibility. By itself, the fossil was fascinating. Viewed alongside the growing collection of preserved meals, its significance became even greater. Each discovery illuminated a different corner of the ecosystem, and each pointed back to the same conclusion. Microraptor was not restricted to a narrow dietary niche. It functioned as a versatile hunter capable of exploiting a remarkable variety of prey, a trait rarely documented with such direct evidence anywhere in the Mesozoic world. A single bone can redirect an entire scientific narrative. In paleontology, large discoveries sometimes emerge from small details: a tooth, a feather impression, the curve of a claw. During late 2022, researchers examining a specimen of Microraptor zhouyanus encountered such a detail inside the animal's body cavity. It was not a complete skeleton nor an intact prey animal. It was a foot. The remains belonged to a mammal approximately the size of a mouse. Estimates suggested a body mass equal to roughly 10% of the predator's own weight. On its own, the discovery expanded the growing list of prey consumed by Microraptor, yet the true significance lay elsewhere. The shape of the foot revealed something unexpected about where that mammal had lived. Different lifestyles leave distinct signatures on skeletal anatomy. Animals that spend much of their time climbing often possess strongly curved digits that enhance grip on bark, branches, and uneven surfaces. Ground-dwelling species typically show different proportions and curvatures suited to movement across soil, leaf litter, or open terrain. The preserved foot from the Microraptor specimen aligned with the latter pattern. This observation carried substantial implications. Earlier evidence had painted a picture of a predator closely associated with elevated parts of the forest. Curved claws, feathered limbs, and dietary remains from arboreal prey all pointed toward a life centered among branches. The mammal fossil introduced another dimension. Its anatomy indicated that the prey had spent its life primarily on the forest floor. Suddenly, the hunting range of Microraptor appeared broader than previously assumed. A predator, restricted to canopy environments, would encounter ground-dwelling mammals only rarely. Direct evidence of such prey suggested regular movement between different layers of the ecosystem. The animal was no longer confined to a single ecological zone. It occupied a larger hunting territory, extending from elevated perches down to the ground below. One possible scenario emerges from that evidence. A microraptor perched above the forest floor could observe movement beneath the canopy, then descend rapidly toward a target before returning upward after a successful capture. The exact sequence remains unknowable, yet the fossil demonstrates that contact between predator and terrestrial prey occurred often enough to become preserved in the geological record. Modern ecosystems provide only partial comparisons. Certain tropical forest hawks spend long periods perched above ground before striking prey below. Some mammals and reptiles also exploit multiple habitat layers during hunting. None reproduces the exact combination of climbing ability, gliding capacity, and dietary breadth documented in Microraptor. Its ecological role remains distinctive, even when viewed against living analogs. The mammal specimen completed an increasingly comprehensive picture. Fish linked the predator to aquatic environments. Birds connected it to the canopy. Lizards demonstrated exploitation of small vertebrates occupying intermediate habitats. Mammalian prey added the forest floor to that network of feeding opportunities. As each dietary discovery accumulated, the boundaries around Microraptor's lifestyle became harder to draw. Many predators specialize within narrow ecological spaces, focusing on a particular prey type or habitat. Evidence from Jahol tells a different story. This small feathered hunter moved across multiple layers of its environment and exploited resources wherever opportunities appeared. The mammal foot occupies only a modest space within the fossil, yet it expanded the world of Microraptor considerably. Through that fragment, the forest became taller, broader, and more interconnected, revealing a predator capable of linking habitats that many other animals experienced separately. For most of the history of paleontology, color belonged to the realm of imagination. Skeletons could reveal shape, bones could hint at movement, fossils preserved traces of anatomy and behavior. Yet the appearance of living skin, scales, and feathers seemed permanently lost, carried away by time long before the surrounding rock had formed. Microraptor helped change that assumption. In 2012, a collaboration between American and Chinese researchers published a study in Science that approached an extraordinary question with unexpected precision. They were not asking how Microraptor moved or what it ate. They wanted to know what color it had been. The investigation centered on microscopic structures called melanosomes. Within living animals, these tiny organelles contain melanin pigments responsible for many shades of black, brown, gray, and other coloration patterns. Under exceptional conditions, the physical form of melanosomes can survive fossilization. Pigment molecules themselves often degrade, yet the structures that once housed them may remain preserved as microscopic impressions. Microraptor offered an ideal opportunity to test this possibility. Its fossils retained feather impressions of unusual quality, preserving details at a scale rarely encountered in animals more than 120 million years old. Researchers examined those impressions using high-resolution imaging techniques, documenting the size, shape, and arrangement of thousands of fossilized melanosomes embedded within the feathers. The process resembled a comparison across deep time. Modern birds possess distinct melanosome patterns associated with different colors and visual effects. Scientists assembled a large database drawn from living species and compared those examples to the structures preserved in Microraptor. Statistical analysis allowed the fossil feathers to be matched against known modern equivalents. A consistent picture emerged. The melanosomes most closely resembled those found in birds, with glossy black plumage displaying subtle iridescence. Across specimen after specimen, the evidence pointed toward the same conclusion. Microraptor was covered in dark feathers, carrying a metallic blue-green sheen that shifted as light moved across their surface. This discovery extended beyond color alone. The iridescence itself carried important information. Unlike ordinary pigmentation, iridescent effects arise from physical architecture. Layers of melanosomes are arranged with remarkable precision, creating nanoscale structures that interact with incoming light. Different wavelengths reflect differently depending on viewing angle, producing the shifting tones familiar in grackles, crows, starlings, and many other modern birds. The fossil record had preserved that architecture. Even after more than 120 million years, enough information remained for researchers to reconstruct an appearance once thought permanently unknowable. It represented the oldest confirmed example of iridescent plumage ever identified. The study was led by paleontologist Julia Clark of the University of Texas at Austin and researcher Matt Shockey, drawing upon a specimen housed at the Beijing Museum of Natural History. Their work demonstrated that fossils could preserve information far beyond bones and feathers. Entire layers of biological detail remained available to careful investigation. A century earlier, an artist reconstructing Microraptor would have chosen colors freely, guided only by intuition. Today, the animal appears with greater clarity. A small predator perched among Cretaceous branches, clothed in black feathers that caught the daylight and returned it in flashes of blue and green. Through structures smaller than a grain of dust, one fleeting aspect of a vanished life crossed an immense gulf of time and became visible again. Scientific ideas often begin as reasonable interpretations of incomplete evidence. Before the discovery of Microraptor's coloration, several researchers had proposed that it may have been active primarily after sunset. The argument rested on anatomy. Its eye sockets appeared relatively large, and large eyes are frequently associated with animals that operate under dim conditions. Combined with its predatory habits, the possibility of a nocturnal hunter seemed plausible. For a time, that interpretation fit comfortably within the available evidence. Fossils could reveal the dimensions of the skull, the proportions of the limbs, and the arrangement of feathers. They could not yet reveal how those feathers appeared when illuminated by daylight. That missing piece would eventually transform the discussion. The color study, published in 2012, introduced information that changed the picture entirely. Researchers found that Microraptor possessed glossy black plumage with a blue-green iridescent sheen. This detail carried significance, extending far beyond appearance. Iridescence is not merely decoration. It is a biological signal whose effectiveness depends on light. In living birds, iridescent feathers function through highly ordered microscopic structures that reflect different wavelengths depending on viewing angle. A bird standing in shade may appear nearly black. A slight shift of position can release flashes of green, blue, violet, or bronze. These changing colors create visual displays that attract attention and communicate information to other animals. Such displays require an audience capable of seeing them. More importantly, they require sufficient illumination. Without light, the effect disappears. A feather designed to shimmer gains little advantage in darkness. This pattern appears consistently across modern bird communities. Species that spend most of their active lives at night tend toward subdued coloration. Browns, grays, and mottled patterns dominate among nocturnal hunters, helping them remain concealed while resting during daylight hours. Owls provide a familiar example. Their plumage emphasizes camouflage and disruption of outline. Glossy, metallic displays are absent. Nightjars, frogmouths, and other primarily nocturnal birds follow similar trends. Their feathers blend into bark, leaves, and shadows. The biological logic is straightforward. Visual signals offer limited value when visibility itself is restricted. Microraptor presented the opposite condition. Its preserved melanosome architecture indicated plumage designed to interact with sunlight. That observation weakened the nocturnal interpretation considerably. The evidence pointed toward an animal active during daylight, when shifting reflections could be seen by rivals, mates, or potential competitors moving through the same environment. Once viewed through that lens, the feathers acquired a second role beyond flight. They became communication devices. The shimmering surface likely conveyed information about health, maturity, fitness, or social status. Similar functions occur throughout the modern avian world, where feather displays influence courtship, territorial behavior, and species recognition. The implications reached well beyond a single dinosaur. Earlier assumptions often placed sophisticated feather signaling deep within the later evolution of birds. Microraptor suggested a different timeline. Here was a feathered dinosaur from the early Cretaceous carrying plumage whose appearance seems tied to visual communication. Complex signaling systems were already developing among feathered animals long before modern birds emerged. A predator moving through the forests of Johol was therefore doing more than hunting. Its feathers interacted with daylight, broadcasting information to others of its kind. Through those preserved structures, a social dimension of dinosaur life comes into view, revealing that display, recognition, and communication were woven into feathered ecosystems far earlier than once imagined. A feather can perform many jobs at once, yet sometimes a closer look reveals that one purpose has been mistaken for another. For years, Microraptor's tail occupied such a place in scientific interpretation. Stretching behind the body and carrying an impressive arrangement of feathers, it seemed natural to view the structure as part of the animal's flight apparatus. Researchers envisioned a broad aerodynamic surface, helping steer glides through the forest, functioning much like the tail of a modern bird or aircraft. That idea remained influential until the same investigations that revealed Microraptor's coloration prompted scientists to examine its feathers in far greater detail. High-quality specimens preserved subtle features that earlier reconstructions had overlooked. As those details accumulated, the familiar image of a large, teardrop-shaped tail fan began to change. The feathers proved narrower than expected. Rather than forming a wide aerodynamic surface extending uniformly behind the body, the tail displayed a more specialized arrangement. Near its end projected two elongated streamer feathers that stretched beyond the rest of the plumage. These structures immediately drew comparisons with living birds known for ornamental feather displays. Motmots, quetzals, and several other modern species possess elongated tail feathers that function primarily as visual signals. Such streamers attract attention, enhance displays, and communicate information during courtship. Their value lies in what other animals see. Their contribution to flight performance is minimal and, in some cases, may even impose a small aerodynamic cost. The resemblance between those modern display feathers and the streamers of Microraptor carried important implications. If the tail had evolved mainly for aerodynamic control, broad stabilizing surfaces would be expected. Instead, the anatomy pointed toward a different evolutionary pathway. The tail was not optimized solely as a steering device. It had become part of a visual language. Researchers concluded that social signaling likely represented the primary role of these elongated feathers. During interactions between individuals, the tail could have enhanced displays related to courtship, territorial behavior, or species recognition. Movement, posture, and changing angles of sunlight may have made the ornament particularly noticeable within the forest environment. This conclusion altered more than the interpretation of a single body part. It separated functions that had previously been treated as one. The hindlimb feathers retained strong evidence of aerodynamic utility, contributing to gliding performance and aerial stability. The tail, by contrast, appears to have followed a different selective trajectory. One structure assisted movement through the air, while another communicated information to members of the same species. Such a division reflects a broader pattern emerging throughout feather evolution. Feathers were never restricted to a single purpose. Long before the rise of modern birds, they had already become versatile biological tools capable of serving multiple roles simultaneously. Insulation, display, camouflage, balance, brooding behavior, and aerodynamic assistance could all exist within the same lineage. Microraptor offers a particularly vivid example of that complexity. Across its body, feathers participated in different evolutionary stories unfolding at the same time. Some contributed to locomotion, others influenced social interactions. Together, they reveal an animal shaped by more than the demands of flight alone. The image that emerges is richer than earlier reconstructions suggested. A gliding predator moved through the forest carrying not only the equipment needed for travel, but also ornaments shaped by communication and display. Reminders that evolution often builds many functions into the same elegant surface. A feather drifting through the air seems inseparable from the idea of flight. Modern experience encourages that connection. Birds cross oceans, climb mountain winds, and circle forests on feathered wings. Looking backward through time, it is tempting to assume that feathers emerged for the same purpose. The fossil record tells a different story, one that begins long before any dinosaur left the ground. Evidence accumulated over recent decades has steadily reshaped this understanding. Across numerous fossil sites, paleontologists have uncovered feathered dinosaurs that show no indication of flight capability. Their bodies lacked the proportions, musculature, and skeletal adaptations required for aerial movement, yet feathers were already present. Among the most important examples is Sinosauropteryx, a small compsognathid dinosaur recovered from the same broader region that would later produce Microraptor. Along its body ran coverings of simple filamentous structures, often described as protofeathers. These were fundamentally different from the veined flight feathers seen in birds and four-winged dinosaurs. They possessed no broad aerodynamic surfaces and could not generate meaningful lift. Their purpose appears to have been far more practical. Small-bodied animals lose heat rapidly because of their high surface area to volume ratio. A covering of filamentous feathers would have provided insulation, helping maintain body temperature in changing environmental conditions. In many respects, these structures functioned similarly to the down feathers of living birds. Once feathers existed, evolution gained a versatile material, capable of serving additional roles. Structures initially shaped by thermal demands could be modified, enlarged, branched, and arranged in new ways. Over immense spans of time, feather architecture diversified. Some forms became useful for display, others enhanced camouflage. Certain lineages developed increasingly complex, veined feathers that interacted with moving air. This progression did not follow a single straight path. Different dinosaur groups experimented with feather forms simultaneously. The fossil record preserves a growing assortment of structures ranging from simple filaments to elaborate pennaceous feathers. Nature was exploring possibilities long before any final outcome emerged. Microraptor occupies a particularly revealing position within that history. Studies of its aerodynamic performance suggest that efficient gliding did not require the highly refined wing systems seen in modern birds. Research conducted at the University of Southampton demonstrated that even relatively primitive feather arrangements could generate useful aerodynamic effects. Stability and lift were achievable without the precision engineering characteristic of later avian flight. That finding carries broad evolutionary significance. If early gliding animals could benefit from feathers that were not perfectly optimized for aerial movement, then flight no longer appears as the original target of feather evolution. Instead, feathers became available first, acquiring new functions as opportunities emerged. Natural selection frequently operates through this kind of biological repurposing. Structures shaped for one role become useful in another context. Features associated with insulation may later contribute to display. Display structures may eventually influence movement. Existing anatomy is modified and redirected rather than invented from nothing. Viewed from that perspective, the origin of flight becomes less like the construction of a machine and more like the gradual discovery of an unexpected possibility. Feathers provided warmth, visual signals, and protective covering long before they carried animals through the air. Once those structures existed, certain lineages found ways to exploit their aerodynamic potential. Microraptor stands as evidence of that transition. Its feathers belong to a legacy older than flight itself, a legacy that began with insulation and display, then expanded into gliding and aerial movement. The sky emerged from a toolkit that evolution had assembled for entirely different reasons. Scientific arguments can endure for generations, gathering evidence piece by piece while remaining unresolved. The origin of bird flight became one of those debates. For much of the 20th century, paleontologists divided into two broad camps, each attempting to explain how animals first crossed the boundary between earth and sky. One proposal imagined the journey beginning among branches. According to the arboreal, or trees down, hypothesis, small, feathered animals climbed into forest canopies and moved from tree to tree through controlled descents. Gliding provided a natural starting point. As aerodynamic control improved through evolutionary change, flapping flight eventually emerged from those earlier aerial behaviors. A competing model placed the crucial innovations on the ground. The cursorial, or ground-up, hypothesis envisioned active runners accelerating across open terrain. Feathered forelimbs may have assisted balance, maneuverability, or short bursts of lift. Through incremental changes, these structures became increasingly effective until true powered flight appeared. Both ideas possessed strengths. Both carried significant weaknesses as well. The arboreal model benefited from simple physics. Gravity already supplies forward motion and downward acceleration. An animal launching from a height begins with energy available for gliding. The challenge came from the fossil record. Many known theropod dinosaurs appeared adapted for terrestrial life, making tree-dwelling ancestors difficult to identify with confidence. Supporters of the cursorial model could point toward the strong legs and active lifestyles of numerous theropods. Their scenario connected flight to animals already displaying agility and speed. Aerodynamics created a persistent obstacle. Generating meaningful lift while running on the ground requires overcoming constraints that remain demanding even for modern flying birds. For decades, evidence accumulated without delivering a decisive resolution. The discussion often appeared framed as a choice between two mutually exclusive pathways. One route began in trees, the other began on the forest floor. A single answer seemed necessary. Then Microraptor entered the conversation. Its anatomy carried features that belonged comfortably in neither category alone. Curved claws resembled those of climbing animals. Long feathered limbs formed aerodynamic surfaces suited for gliding. At the same time, Microraptor remained a dromaeosaurid, closely related to terrestrial predators that spent their lives moving across the ground. This combination altered the landscape of the debate. The animal demonstrated that evolutionary history could produce forms occupying multiple ecological roles simultaneously. A creature might climb, perch, glide, descend, and forage without fitting neatly into categories established by later scientific arguments. Research on its diet reinforced that complexity. Evidence from preserved stomach contents indicated hunting activity in trees, near water, and at ground level. Such versatility suggested a lifestyle that crossed environmental boundaries rather than remaining confined within one setting. As additional feathered dinosaurs emerged from northeastern China, the picture became even more intricate. Some species displayed feathers suited for display, others showed aerodynamic potential. Certain lineages experimented with gliding structures that left no descendants. Evolution appeared less like a straight road and more like a branching network filled with temporary solutions. Microraptor did not conclusively prove that birds evolved through a single trees down pathway. Neither did it validate the ground up model. Its greater contribution was exposing the limits of that binary framework. The transition toward flight now appeared as a dynamic process involving experimentation across many lineages. Within the forests of the early Cretaceous, natural selection was testing possibilities in parallel. Some paths ended, others continued. Microraptor remains one of the clearest reminders that major evolutionary innovations rarely emerge through a single simple sequence. They arise from a landscape crowded with alternatives, where many designs briefly share the world before only a few persist. Some discoveries reshape a debate by introducing new evidence. Others do something more profound. They reveal that the debate itself may have been framed too narrowly from the beginning. In the early years of the 21st century, as researchers were still absorbing the implications of feathered dinosaurs from northeastern China, another line of investigation emerged from living birds. Kenneth Dial, a biologist at the University of Montana, was studying young chukar partridges when he noticed a behavior that had escaped scientific attention. Newly hatched chicks, still incapable of flight, could scramble up steep inclines using rapid wing beats. Even surfaces approaching vertical could be climbed. Their developing wings were not lifting them into the air. They were pressing them toward the surface. The mechanism became known as wing-assisted incline running, often abbreviated as WARE. Each flap generated aerodynamic force directed downward and backward. That force increased traction between the feet and the climbing surface, allowing the birds to maintain grip while ascending. The wings functioned as tools for climbing long before they functioned as tools for flight. This observation carried evolutionary implications that extended far beyond modern birds. It suggested that feathered forelimbs might provide a practical advantage even before true aerial locomotion evolved. An animal did not need to glide between trees or launch into the air from the ground to benefit from feathers and flapping. It could use those structures while climbing. Developmental biology added another intriguing layer. Chukar chicks perform wing-assisted incline, running almost immediately after hatching. As they mature, the same muscles, motions, and feathered surfaces gradually contribute to increasingly sophisticated flight behavior. No sharp boundary separates climbing assistance from aerial performance. One behavior blends into the next through growth and refinement. Viewed through that lens, the origin of flight begins to look less like a single leap and more like a sequence of overlapping functions. Feathers that first aided balance, insulation, display, or climbing could later become useful for gliding. Structures that improved gliding could eventually support powered flight. Evolution often modifies existing tools instead of inventing entirely new ones. Microraptor occupies a fascinating position within this broader picture. Its anatomy aligns comfortably with several stages of that continuum. The curved claws suggest strong climbing ability. Its feathered limbs generated aerodynamic forces during controlled aerial movement. Fossil evidence also indicates activity beyond the canopy, including encounters with prey that spent much of their lives on the forest floor. Such versatility makes rigid categories difficult to maintain. Microraptor does not appear as an animal committed exclusively to one behavioral strategy. It seems more like a creature capable of moving through different parts of its environment using different solutions as circumstances required. Climbing, gliding, perching, descending, and hunting may all have formed parts of a connected routine. The significance of wing-assisted incline running lies in the way it dissolved an apparent choice. The origin of flight no longer needed to begin entirely in trees or entirely on the ground. Multiple behaviors could contribute to the same evolutionary destination. Different lineages may have emphasized different combinations of those behaviors while exploring similar aerodynamic possibilities. Against that backdrop, Microraptor appears less like an odd experiment and more like a glimpse into a period when flight itself remained unfinished. The boundaries separating climbing, gliding, and flying had not yet solidified. Evolution was still testing where feathers could lead, and the forests of the early Cretaceous were filled with animals exploring those possibilities in their own ways. Scale has a way of reshaping familiar ideas. After spending years examining Microraptor, it became easy to picture four-winged dinosaurs as small specialists, agile creatures threading through branches with bodies light enough for controlled aerial movement. Then another member of the same family emerged from the rocks of Liaoning and expanded that picture in an unexpected direction. In 2012, fossil hunters working within the deposits of northeastern China uncovered the remains of a new Microraptorine. 2 years later, Luis Chiappe and colleagues formally described the animal in Nature Communications, naming it Changyuraptor yangi. The fossil came from the same broader world that had already transformed understanding of feathered dinosaurs, a landscape preserved within the early Cretaceous deposits of the Jehol ecosystem. At first glance, Changyuraptor appeared familiar. Its body carried feathers across the forelimbs and hindlimbs, producing the characteristic four-winged profile associated with its relatives. Closer inspection revealed a dramatic difference. This animal was far larger than any previously known Microraptorine. From snout to tail tip, Changyuraptor measured roughly 1.2 meters in length and weighed approximately 4 kilograms. That placed it near the size of a modern turkey. Compared with earlier discoveries, it represented an increase substantial enough to challenge assumptions about the practical limits of four-winged body plans. The largest known member of the group, until that point, suddenly looked much less exceptional. Its existence raised an important question. If aerodynamic surfaces on both the forelimbs and hindlimbs were useful only for very small animals, a creature of this size should have struggled to maintain them. Yet Changyuraptor possessed those structures in abundance. Evolution had preserved the design even as body mass increased. The most striking feature appeared at the end of the tail. There, researchers found elongated feathers extending far beyond the main body. Some reached nearly 30 centimeters in length, representing roughly one-third of the skeleton's total length. No non-avian dinosaur known at the time possessed longer feathers. Aerodynamic modeling suggested these tail feathers may have provided a stabilizing influence during aerial movement. Larger animals face greater challenges when controlling descent because increased mass produces higher momentum. Extended feathers trailing behind the body could help moderate pitch and reduce the severity of landing impacts. Even modest improvements would have carried significant value for an animal moving among trees. The forest inhabited by Changyuraptor was rich with contrasts. Conifers and ginkgo trees dominated much of the landscape. Lakes supported fish, amphibians, and aquatic reptiles. Feathered predators occupied multiple ecological roles. In that same environment lived one of the most surprising dinosaurs ever discovered, the giant feathered Tyrannosauroid Yutyrannus. Stretching between 8 and 9 meters in length, it towered over the smaller inhabitants of the ecosystem. Within a single region, feathered animals ranged from creatures scarcely larger than modern birds to predators approaching the size of a bus. The old image of feathers belonging only to small, flight-bound forms no longer matched reality. Alan Turner once remarked that a person encountering Changyuraptor might simply think it looked like a very strange bird. That observation captures something important. Each new fossil from Liaoning continued to blur categories that once seemed obvious. Four wings, long feathers, climbing adaptations, and increasing body size could all exist together within a single lineage, revealing how many forms evolution explored before settling on the birds that survive today. Movement through the air is only part of the story. Every glide must end somewhere. Every descent eventually meets bark, branch, or ground. For animals experimenting with aerial locomotion during the early Cretaceous, reaching a destination was important, but arriving intact may have mattered even more. The discovery of Changyuraptor brought that challenge into sharper focus. Here was a four-winged dinosaur, substantially larger than Microraptor, carrying greater mass through the same forest environment. Its anatomy demonstrated that the four-winged design could scale upward to a degree. Yet, increased size introduces complications that become difficult to ignore once gravity enters the equation. Physics places limits on every flying or gliding creature. As body mass increases, weight rises more rapidly than wing surface area. An animal twice as large does not automatically receive twice as much aerodynamic support. The balance shifts. More momentum must be controlled. More energy must be managed during descent. Landing becomes a progressively demanding problem. For a small glider, minor mistakes may be forgiven by low speed and limited mass. A larger animal carries less room for error. A misjudged approach can generate stronger impacts, greater instability, and higher risk of injury. Natural selection, therefore, places intense pressure on structures capable of moderating those forces. Changuraptor appears to have possessed one such structure. Its elongated tail feathers stand among the most extraordinary feathers ever documented in a non-avian dinosaur. Stretching nearly 30 centimeters beyond the body, they created an aerodynamic surface extending far behind the center of mass. Researchers proposed that these feathers played an important role during the final moments of descent. A long feathered tail can influence airflow in several ways. By increasing drag, it helps dissipate speed before contact with a landing surface. By altering the distribution of aerodynamic forces, it assists control over pitch, allowing the body to maintain a more favorable orientation. Even small improvements become valuable when repeated thousands of times across a lifetime. Modern birds provide a useful comparison. Many species spread their tail feathers during landing, transforming them into braking surfaces. The expanded tail slows forward motion and stabilizes the body as feet prepare for contact. Changuraptor appears to have employed a similar principle, though on a more dramatic scale. Its tail feathers occupied a far larger proportion of total body length than those of most living birds. That difference hints at the challenges faced by larger four-winged dinosaurs. Their anatomy may have required additional aerodynamic assistance simply to manage the consequences of increased size. The tail was no longer only an ornament or balancing structure. It became part of a coordinated system designed to control descent through crowded forest habitats. This insight carries broader evolutionary implications. Every aerial body plan operates within constraints. A design that functions effectively at one size may become increasingly difficult to maintain as mass rises. The four-winged arrangement appears to have been successful for small and moderately sized animals, yet evidence for truly gigantic four-winged species remains absent. One possible explanation lies in the mathematics of landing itself. Beyond a certain threshold, the aerodynamic benefits provided by additional feathers may no longer compensate for rising momentum. Each increase in size would demand greater control, greater braking capacity, and greater precision during approach. Within the forests of the Jehol world, evolution explored that boundary. Changuraptor may represent one of the farthest points reached by the four-winged experiment, a larger descendant carrying the same aerial heritage while revealing the physical limits that ultimately shaped its future. A lifespan measured in millions of years leaves traces that are difficult to dismiss. Across changing climates, shifting forests, and generations beyond counting, unsuccessful designs tend to fade. The four-winged dinosaurs did not disappear after a brief appearance in the fossil record. They endured, diversified, and occupied Mesozoic ecosystems for a span of time longer than many entire animal groups have existed. Microraptor, familiar now as one of the most thoroughly studied examples, lived roughly 120 to 125 million years ago. Its fossils emerged from the early Cretaceous landscapes of northeastern China, where volcanic activity and fine sediments preserved extraordinary details of feathered life. For many years, it seemed to represent a singular solution to aerial movement, an unusual creature testing possibilities between earth and sky. The discovery of older relatives transformed that perspective. Anchiornis huxley, recovered from rocks dating to approximately 160 million years ago, carried feathering along both forelimbs and hindlimbs. This pushed the four-winged condition deep into the late Jurassic, tens of millions of years before Microraptor appeared. Suddenly, the timeline expanded. What once looked like an isolated curiosity became part of a much longer story. Anchiornis itself differed substantially from its later counterpart. It was smaller, measuring around 34 centimeters in length and weighing close to 110 grams. Color reconstruction studies have revealed a striking appearance, with black and white plumage accented by a reddish-brown crest. Its proportions suggest an animal navigating a forest world through climbing, hopping, controlled descent, and perhaps short aerial excursions. Even at this early stage, feathers had already become sophisticated structures serving multiple purposes. Additional discoveries continued to fill the gaps. Xiaotingia, Pedopena, and Sericornis each displayed varying degrees of hind limb feather development. None were exact replicas of one another. Their bodies reveal subtle differences in anatomy, feather arrangement, and proportions. Such variation carries an important message. Evolution was not producing a single blueprint and repeating it endlessly. Multiple lineages were modifying the same general concept in different ways. That diversity matters because it helps distinguish a successful adaptation from an evolutionary accident. A trait appearing once may reflect chance. A trait appearing repeatedly across related animals, separated by time and anatomy, suggests enduring utility. Hind limb feathers persisted through millions of years because they continued to provide advantages within particular environments. The forests these animals inhabited offered countless opportunities for aerial movement. Dense vegetation created three-dimensional pathways unavailable to creatures restricted to the ground. Branches, trunks, gaps, and elevated perches formed a layered landscape where gliding, climbing, and controlled descent could save energy, avoid predators, or improve hunting success. In such habitats, four-winged locomotion appears to have remained competitive for an extraordinary duration. Viewed across 40 million years, the four-winged body plan no longer resembles a failed experiment waiting for true birds to replace it. It emerges as a flourishing branch of dinosaur evolution with its own history, adaptations, and ecological achievements. Generation after generation, these feathered animals occupied forests stretching across immense spans of geological time, refining a strategy that proved resilient enough to persist from the late Jurassic into the early Cretaceous, leaving behind a record of sustained success written in stone. A forest becomes easier to understand when one follows a meal from beginning to end. A seed feeds an insect feeds a lizard feeds a predator. Energy moves through living bodies, weaving connections that are rarely preserved. Most ecosystems vanish without leaving a map behind. The Jahal world proved unusually generous. Across its lakes, woodlands, and volcanic plains, moments of feeding were captured with such fidelity that researchers could reconstruct relationships that had disappeared more than 120 million years ago. By the year 2019, paleontologists had assembled evidence from at least 20 separate dietary fossils recovered from the Jahal deposits. Some preserved stomach contents. Others contained regurgitated pellets, a few preserved fossilized feces. Each specimen recorded a direct biological interaction, a snapshot of one organism consuming another. Taken individually, these discoveries were valuable curiosities. Viewed together, they became something much larger. Researchers combined these records to build the first detailed food web of an early Cretaceous terrestrial ecosystem. Instead of studying species in isolation, they examined how entire communities were connected. The resulting picture revealed a network of interactions stretching from plants at the base of the ecosystem to predators occupying its highest levels. At the foundation stood the primary producers. Conifers formed much of the forest canopy, accompanied by ginkgos and some of the earliest flowering plants. These converted sunlight into living tissue, creating the energy source upon which everything else depended. Herbivorous insects fed among leaves, stems, seeds, and reproductive structures. Their abundance supported a diverse collection of small vertebrates that occupied nearly every corner of the landscape. Freshwater lakes added another dimension. Fish thrived in these waters and emerged as one of the most important resources in the entire ecosystem. Evidence linked them to an extraordinary variety of consumers. Aquatic reptiles fed upon them, pterosaurs captured them from above, birds hunted them along shorelines, small dinosaurs targeted them in shallow water. Larger predators exploited them whenever opportunities arose. Few organisms connected as many ecological pathways as fish did within the J-hole environment. Among the predators moving through this landscape, Microraptor occupied a particularly interesting position. Earlier discoveries had already revealed its unusual dietary flexibility. Fish from lakes, lizards from forest undergrowth, mammals traveling across the ground, and birds moving through the canopy all appeared among its confirmed prey. That breadth allowed it to draw energy from multiple habitat layers simultaneously. Such behavior placed Microraptor near the top of the small vertebrate food chain. It was neither the largest hunter nor the most specialized. Its strength came from adaptability. When one food source became scarce, others remained available. Few predators documented from the fossil record demonstrate such a broad ecological reach through direct evidence. The completed food web revealed an ecosystem of remarkable complexity. Forest, shoreline, canopy, lake surface, and ground layer were tightly linked through countless feeding interactions. Energy flowed continuously between environments that might appear separate at first glance. Within that network, feathered predators acted as connectors, carrying resources from one habitat into another. Far from being a simple prehistoric woodland, the Jehol ecosystem emerges as a richly interconnected community, one whose relationships can still be traced today through fossils that preserved not only life itself, but the pathways that sustained it. Success in nature is often measured through numbers. A predator may possess impressive claws, unusual anatomy, or striking feathers, yet leave behind only a handful of fossils. Microraptor tells a different story. Again and again, its remains emerge from the rocks of Liaoning province, appearing in museum collections, research papers, and excavation sites, with a frequency rarely seen among non-avian dinosaurs. It was not an occasional resident of the Jehol ecosystem, it was one of its defining inhabitants. Hundreds of specimens have been recovered, making Microraptor among the best represented dinosaurs in the entire fossil record. This abundance carries significance beyond simple counting. Every additional specimen provides another glimpse into the lives of individuals that once moved through the same forests. Collectively, they allow paleontologists to examine variation within a species rather than relying on a single exceptional skeleton. Patterns begin to emerge when such a large sample becomes available. Some fossils belong to young individuals whose bodies had not yet reached adult proportions. Others represent mature animals displaying fully developed plumage and skeletal features. Differences in size, feather arrangement, and proportions can be compared across entire populations. Few non-avian dinosaurs offer such an opportunity. Among the most intriguing observations are variations in tail feather length and body shape. Certain specimens possess proportions that differ consistently from others of similar size. Researchers have explored whether these distinctions reflect sexual dimorphism, the biological differences between males and females seen throughout modern animal populations. Definitive answers remain difficult because behavior does not fossilize, yet the possibility becomes far easier to investigate when hundreds of individuals are available for comparison. Growth patterns have also become clearer through this remarkable collection. By examining bone tissues and developmental stages, scientists can trace how Microraptor changed throughout its life. Juveniles did not merely resemble smaller adults. Their bodies matured through predictable sequences, providing clues about metabolism, maturity, and population structure within the species. The very abundance of Microraptor raises an ecological question. Why was it so successful while many other species remained comparatively rare? The answer appears tied to flexibility. Earlier evidence has revealed an animal capable of exploiting resources from lakes, forest floors, tree trunks, and canopy branches. Such versatility reduces dependence on any single food source or habitat zone. Modern ecosystems offer useful parallels. Corvids, including crows, ravens, and magpies, thrive across diverse environments because they adapt readily to changing conditions. They consume varied foods, use multiple foraging strategies, and exploit opportunities unavailable to more specialized species. Microraptor may have occupied a comparable ecological role within its own world, although expressed through the anatomy of a feathered dinosaur rather than a modern bird. Its four-wing surfaces aided movement through forest space. Curved claws supported climbing and perching. Dietary evidence demonstrates a willingness to pursue many kinds of prey. Ground level, lakeshore, understory, and canopy all offered opportunities. Few predators could operate effectively across so many layers of a single ecosystem. Viewed through that lens, the abundance of Microraptor becomes easier to understand. It was not merely surviving within the Jehol forests. It was flourishing there, a versatile hunter whose adaptability allowed it to become one of the most common and successful predators in a landscape crowded with feathered competitors. Sometimes a scientific discovery enters the world surrounded by celebration, only to unravel under closer examination. Years before Microraptor received its formal description, another fossil captured international attention and appeared destined to become one of the most important specimens in paleontology. For a brief moment, it seemed to offer a perfect bridge between dinosaurs and birds, a fossil so compelling that many believed a long-standing evolutionary puzzle had finally been solved. In October of 1999, National Geographic organized a press conference announcing the discovery of Archaeoraptor liaoningensis. The specimen appeared extraordinary. Its body combined features associated with early birds and non-avian dinosaurs. Wings occupied one end of the skeleton, while a long dinosaurian tail extended from the other. To many observers, it looked exactly like the transitional form researchers had hoped to find. Public excitement grew rapidly. The fossil was presented as a missing link connecting two major branches of evolutionary history. Yet among specialists, uncertainty emerged almost immediately. Experienced paleontologists noticed details that seemed difficult to reconcile. Certain bones appeared unusual. Some structures did not align naturally. Questions accumulated even as headlines spread across newspapers and magazines around the world. One of the first researchers to voice concern was Philip Curie. Examining photographs of the specimen, he observed that the feet appeared suspiciously symmetrical, almost as though one side had been duplicated from the other. Additional scrutiny revealed further inconsistencies. When scientific journals evaluated the proposed research, skepticism intensified. Both Nature and Science declined to publish the paper describing the fossil. Reviewers raised concerns regarding its origin, legality, and authenticity. Those concerns extended beyond anatomy. The specimen had been purchased through commercial fossil channels after being smuggled out of China. Its path into private hands complicated efforts to verify provenance and reconstruction history. Despite these warnings, National Geographic proceeded with publication in November of 1999, placing the fossil before a global audience while important questions remained unresolved. As investigators examined the specimen using computed tomography scanning, the truth emerged piece by piece. Internal images revealed fractures, mismatched boundaries, and hidden joins. Archaeoraptor was not a single animal. It was a composite assembled from numerous fragments belonging to different creatures. What appeared to be a seamless skeleton had actually been constructed from 88 separate pieces. The motivation behind the fabrication was straightforward. Fossils commanding dramatic narratives often bring higher prices than ordinary specimens. By combining fragments into a creature that appeared uniquely significant, its creator increased its commercial appeal. The result fooled collectors, journalists, and initially even some researchers. The individual components eventually revealed their true identities. The head and upper body belonged to the primitive bird, Yanornis. Other sections originated from unrelated animals. Most striking of all was the tail. The feature that gave Archaeoraptor its reputation as a perfect evolutionary intermediate came from an entirely different creature. That tail belonged to Microraptor. An unexpected consequence followed from the scandal. As scientists traced the origins of the fabricated fossil, attention returned to the genuine specimens from which its pieces had been taken. What began as a cautionary tale about fraud ultimately helped draw notice toward a legitimate animal of extraordinary importance. Beneath the layers of glue, confusion, and misplaced certainty, the real story had been waiting all along, preserved within the tail of a four-winged predator that would soon reshape the study of flight evolution. A single-tail vertebra can carry a surprising amount of history. In the aftermath of the Archaeoraptor scandal, while debates spread through museums, journals, and newsrooms, one researcher noticed something deeply familiar within the fossil that had captivated the world. The forged specimen contained a fragment that did not belong with the rest of the skeleton. That observation would alter the course of the entire story. Shuxing had been studying material from Liaoning for years, examining fossils emerging from deposits that were transforming knowledge of feathered dinosaurs. Among those specimens was a tail belonging to an animal that had not yet been formally introduced to science. When images of Archaeoraptor circulated among specialists, Shu recognized features that matched the tail under his own investigation. The proportions, structure, and arrangement of the bones pointed toward an uncomfortable conclusion. The specimen celebrated as a spectacular evolutionary discovery had been assembled from unrelated parts. At the time, challenging such a high-profile announcement carried professional risks. National Geographic was one of the most influential scientific publications in the world. Public excitement surrounding Archaeoraptor was already widespread, and many people wanted the fossil to be genuine. Even so, Shu contacted the magazine directly and explained his concerns. His message was straightforward. The tail belonged to a different animal, and the fossil could not represent a single authentic specimen. Further investigation confirmed the warning. Detailed scans exposed artificial joins and mismatched fragments throughout the skeleton. Piece by piece, the celebrated missing link dissolved into a collection of separate fossils combined into a commercial fabrication. In the year 2000, National Geographic issued a formal retraction. The reversal was highly visible, yet the process by which it occurred revealed something important about scientific practice. Science advances through evidence, though it also advances through correction. Claims are examined, challenged, tested, and revised. Mistakes can survive for a time, especially when they arrive wrapped in compelling narratives. What ultimately matters is whether the evidence withstands scrutiny. Archaeoraptor failed that test. Phil Curry later reflected on his involvement and described it as the greatest mistake of his life. His statement carried the weight of a researcher confronting an error publicly. Such admissions are rarely comfortable, yet they form part of the self-correcting structure that allows scientific knowledge to improve. The irony at the center of the scandal remained extraordinary. The fossil that threatened to undermine confidence in feathered dinosaur research contained a genuine piece of one of the most important feathered dinosaurs ever discovered. Hidden inside the forgery was part of Microraptor, the very animal that would later strengthen the evolutionary connection between dinosaurs and birds through rigorous study and legitimate evidence. For researchers working in China, the episode also carried broader significance. Suspicion had fallen across an emerging field that was producing one astonishing fossil after another. Confidence needed rebuilding. Xu Xing's response helped establish that foundation. By identifying the fraud openly and insisting that conclusions follow evidence wherever it led, he demonstrated a commitment to scientific standards above personal advantage or public attention. When Microraptor was formally described 3 years later, it arrived within a different atmosphere. The excitement surrounding the discovery remained, yet it rested upon careful documentation, transparent analysis, and a reputation strengthened by intellectual honesty. In an unexpected way, the exposure of the fraud helped prepare the ground for one of paleontology's most important discoveries. Ideas sometimes travel through time in unexpected ways. A small predator moving among the branches of an early Cretaceous forest now finds itself studied by aerospace engineers designing machines for the modern world. More than 120 million years separate those two settings, yet the geometry of Microraptor's body continues to offer practical lessons about movement through air. The source of this interest lies in a feature that once seemed almost bizarre. Microraptor carried large feathered surfaces on both its forelimbs and hind limbs, creating a tandem arrangement unlike the wing structure seen in living birds. For paleontologists, those feathers revealed clues about locomotion and behavior. For engineers, they presented something different, a naturally evolved flight system operating under physical constraints that machines still encounter today. Research into unmanned aerial vehicles has expanded rapidly as designers seek aircraft capable of navigating environments where larger drones struggle. Forest canopies, narrow corridors, disaster zones, and densely packed obstacles demand precise control at low speeds. Conventional wing designs perform well in many situations, yet engineers continue searching for alternatives that improve stability, maneuverability, and efficiency. In that search, Microraptor has emerged as an unexpected reference point. Computer simulations and wind tunnel experiments have allowed researchers to recreate aspects of its four-wing configuration. These studies explore how airflow behaves when two wing surfaces operate in close proximity. Air leaving the forward wings influences the conditions experienced by the rear pair, creating interactions that do not occur in a standard single-wing arrangement. The resulting aerodynamic picture is more complex than earlier assumptions suggested. One recurring finding concerns the rear wings. In several experimental models, changes to the angle of attack of the hind wings produced substantial increases in lift. Adjustments made farther back on the body could influence overall performance to a degree that surprised investigators. Wing orientation also proved important. Altering the dihedral angle, the upward tilt of a wing relative to the body changed stability and lift characteristics across the entire system. Such results carry particular importance at low Reynolds numbers, the aerodynamic regime associated with small animals and miniature aircraft. Under those conditions, airflow behaves differently than it does around large airplanes. Microraptor operated within that same physical world. Its body interacted with thin streams of moving air, where subtle adjustments in feather position could influence descent, maneuvering, and control. Engineers designing compact drones face comparable challenges. Search and rescue vehicles may need to weave through damaged buildings while maintaining stability in confined spaces. Agricultural monitoring systems often operate close to crops, requiring careful low-altitude flight. Environmental survey drones frequently move through cluttered terrain where abrupt turns and controlled speeds matter more than outright velocity. Multi-wing configurations inspired by fossil animals offer one possible route towards solving those problems. The connection forms an elegant bridge between disciplines. Paleontology seeks to understand how extinct organisms lived, while aerospace engineering seeks to build machines capable of new forms of movement. In the case of Microraptor, both fields meet within the same aerodynamic principles. The forests that once shaped this predator disappeared long ago, yet the solutions produced by natural selection remain available for study. Across millions of generations, evolution explored possibilities without blueprints, equations, or design meetings. Long before human engineers assembled wind tunnels and computational models, nature had already tested a four-wing aircraft among the trees. Its fossilized remains continue to offer data, carrying ideas from the early Cretaceous into the technology of the present day. Success in evolution does not guarantee permanence. Entire body plans can flourish for millions of years, spread across landscapes, diversify into multiple forms, and then gradually fade as new solutions emerge. The four-winged dinosaurs of the Jurassic and Cretaceous achieved a long period of success, yet no living bird carries their distinctive arrangement today. Their disappearance was not sudden. It unfolded through a gradual shift in how flight itself evolved. The earliest feathered gliders inhabited a world where moving through the air often meant descending from elevated positions. Branches, trunks, and uneven forest structure provided opportunities to launch, steer, and control a fall. Under those circumstances, additional feathered surfaces on the hind limbs offered clear advantages. More lifting area meant greater stability, slower descents, and increased control among dense vegetation. As evolutionary pathways continued to branch, another challenge became increasingly important. Animals were no longer relying primarily on gravity-assisted movement. Some lineages were beginning to generate sustained thrust through repeated flapping. The demands of powered flight differed fundamentally from those of gliding. Success depended less on passive aerodynamic surfaces and more on the machinery required to move them. This transition reshaped the skeleton. In early forms such as Microraptor, the sternum remained relatively small and lacked the deep keel characteristic of modern birds. That structure serves as an anchor for large pectoral muscles, the engines that power the downstroke during flight. Without substantial muscle attachment surfaces, prolonged flapping remained limited. Airborne travel was possible, though it relied heavily on aerodynamic assistance from body design and environmental conditions. Later, avian ancestors followed a different trajectory. Their breastbones expanded, muscle mass increased, and the forelimbs became increasingly specialized as primary flight organs. Each anatomical change amplified the effectiveness of the wings attached to the arms. Lift, thrust, maneuverability, and endurance improved together. As forelimb performance increased, the contribution provided by feathered hindlimbs diminished. Natural selection tends to favor efficiency when a structure no longer provides enough benefit to offset its costs. Long feathers attached to the legs introduced complications. They could interfere with rapid terrestrial movement, limit agility while running, and create maintenance demands that offered declining aerodynamic returns. An animal capable of generating sufficient lift through powerful forelimb wings alone no longer required an additional pair of aerial surfaces trailing behind. Across countless generations, subtle reductions accumulated. Hindlimb feathers shortened in some lineages. Their aerodynamic role weakened. Selection increasingly favored forms that could move effectively on the ground while retaining excellent flight performance. Ground foraging, rapid takeoff, landing versatility, and efficient locomotion all gained importance within changing ecological settings. The process did not erase feathers themselves. Instead, it redistributed their functions. Forelimbs became dominant flight structures. Tails shortened and became more compact control surfaces. Legs shifted toward locomotion, perching, swimming, scratching, or wading, depending on the lifestyle of each lineage. A body plan once divided across four aerodynamic surfaces became concentrated into a more streamlined arrangement. Modern birds carry the outcome of that transformation. Their ancestors inherited a world shaped by gliders, climbers, and experimental flyers, yet evolution ultimately favored a simpler configuration. Two powerful wings, a compact tail, and unencumbered legs proved adaptable across deserts, forests, oceans, mountains, and polar regions. The four-winged design was not a failure. It was one chapter in a longer story, a successful solution that eventually yielded to another. A predator's success can sometimes be measured by the prey it encounters most often. Across the fossil record of Microraptor, one group appears again and again, preserved not merely as neighbors in the same ecosystem, but occasionally as meals. These were the enantiornithines, birds whose story stretched far beyond the lifetime of any single four-winged hunter. Their rise began during the early Cretaceous, when feathered animals occupied an astonishing variety of ecological roles. Enantiornithines quickly expanded across this landscape. Some spent their lives among branches, moving through forest canopies. Others foraged along shorelines or hunted insects in open spaces. Certain species specialized in fish, while others processed seeds and plant material. Diversity spread through the group with remarkable speed, until enantiornithines became among the most widespread vertebrates in Cretaceous ecosystems. For millions of years, they shared the world with animals that modern classifications place on opposite sides of a familiar boundary. Today, the distinction between bird and dinosaur appears obvious. In the forests of the Cretaceous, that separation was far less apparent. Feathers covered both groups. Many occupied overlapping habitats. Similar body sizes, comparable diets, and related anatomical features created a continuum of forms rather than a sharp division. Microraptor existed within that continuum. When it pursued an enantiornithine through branches, the encounter was not a confrontation between an archaic dinosaur and a modern-style bird. Both animals belong to neighboring branches of the same evolutionary story. Their feathers reflected shared ancestry. Their coexistence illustrated how richly varied that lineage had already become. Generations passed, forests changed, rivers shifted course, mountains rose while others eroded away. Volcanic activity altered landscapes across entire regions. Climate patterns fluctuated repeatedly through the Cretaceous world. Through all of it, enantiornithines endured. Their success was not measured in thousands or millions of years alone. Their history ultimately extended across more than 60 million years, making them one of the longest-lasting avian groups of the Mesozoic era. The four-winged gliders disappeared much earlier. By the later stages of the Cretaceous, the skies belonged to different communities. Enantiornithines remained among the dominant birds, carrying forward ecological networks that had roots reaching deep into earlier periods. They occupied forests, wetlands, lake shores, and coastal environments across multiple continents, becoming familiar participants in ecosystems that no longer contained animals like Microraptor. Then came the event that reshaped life on Earth. Approximately 66 million years ago, the Chicxulub impact transformed global environments with extraordinary speed. Food chains collapsed, habitats vanished. Many of the dominant groups that had defined the Mesozoic disappeared. Enantiornithines vanished with them. A different branch of bird evolution survived. These were the ornithorans, ancestors of all living birds. Evidence suggests many were adaptable generalists, often associated with ground-dwelling habits and ecological flexibility. Those characteristics proved valuable in a damaged world where specialized lifestyles became difficult to sustain. The skies that followed belonged to their descendants. Yet for tens of millions of years before that turning point, enantiornithines had carried a thriving aerial ecosystem across changing continents and shifting climates. They outlived the four-winged hunters that once preyed upon them, preserving a chapter of Cretaceous life until the final days of the age of dinosaurs. A forest can grow from a single seed, yet no one expects every branch to follow the same direction. Some reach upward, others bend toward openings in the canopy. Many flourish for centuries before ending. Evolution follows a similar pattern, producing a living structure whose pathways spread outward in countless directions. Within that branching history, Microraptor occupies a place that is often misunderstood. There is a natural tendency to arrange the past into orderly sequences. Dinosaur becomes feathered dinosaur. Feathered dinosaur becomes four-winged glider. Four-winged glider becomes bird. The story feels neat, almost architectural, as though life followed a blueprint moving toward a predetermined destination. Fossils can appear to encourage this interpretation when viewed one after another in museum displays or textbook diagrams. The reality preserved in stone is far more intricate. Microraptor was not waiting to become something else. It was already a complete organism, adapted to the world around it and successful within its own ecological setting. Its anatomy was not an unfinished draft of a future bird. It represented a fully functioning solution to the challenges of life in early Cretaceous forests. Evidence gathered across recent decades has reinforced this perspective. Four-winged species appear repeatedly across different fossil deposits and geological intervals. Their presence extends across tens of millions of years, far beyond the lifespan expected for a brief transitional stage. Such persistence reflects stability. Natural selection continued to maintain these animals because their body plan worked. Branches of life often explore multiple solutions to similar problems at the same time. During the Mesozoic, The air was shared by pterosaurs, early birds, and feathered non-avian dinosaurs. Each lineage approached movement through the environment in its own way. Some emphasized soaring, others specialized in flapping flight. Four-winged gliders occupied another niche entirely, using combinations of climbing, controlled descent, maneuverability, and short aerial movements among densely vegetated habitats. Looking backward from the present can create the illusion that surviving groups were somehow destined to prevail. Modern birds surround us today, making their history appear inevitable. Yet the future was never visible to the creatures living through it. Microraptor had no knowledge that descendants of other lineages would eventually inherit the skies. It existed in a moment when numerous aerodynamic experiments were unfolding simultaneously across the dinosaur family tree. Many evolutionary innovations that endured for millions of years eventually disappeared. Reef builders, marine predators, mammalian groups, and entire forests have flourished before fading from the world. Their disappearance does not imply weakness. Environmental change, shifting ecosystems, geographic isolation, competition, and chance events all influence survival across geological timescales. The same principle applies here. Four-winged dinosaurs were not replaced because nature identified a superior design and discarded an inferior one. Their story ended within broader patterns affecting countless organisms throughout Earth's history. Another branch continued, carrying different anatomical features and ecological advantages into changing conditions. Seen from that wider perspective, Microraptor becomes something richer than a stepping stone. It stands as a reminder that evolution generates diversity first and permanence second. The living world has always been shaped by parallel possibilities, many of them successful, many of them beautiful, and only a few still present today. The story does not end with fossils sealed in stone. Part of it remains active, carried through forests, grasslands, coastlines, wetlands, and cities by creatures that still fill the skies today. Every living bird contains traces of a much older world, preserved not in rock, but in strands of genetic information, passed from generation to generation across immense spans of time. A robin hopping across a lawn and an eagle circling above a mountain appear separated from Microraptor by an almost unimaginable gulf. More than 120 million years stand between them. Entire ecosystems have vanished. Continents have shifted. Countless species have appeared and disappeared. Yet within the cells of modern birds, fragments of that distant heritage remain embedded in the machinery of development. Genes do not operate as isolated instructions. They function within intricate networks that determine when structures form, where they appear, and how strongly they develop. Throughout evolutionary history, many features have not been erased when they cease to be useful. Their genetic foundations often remain present, altered through changes in regulation instead of deletion. Evolution frequently rewires existing systems, modifying how instructions are used while retaining much of the original code. The feathered hindlimbs associated with four-winged ancestors provide a striking example. Research into bird development has shown that the capacity to produce feathers on the legs never entirely disappeared. Regulatory mechanisms evolved that suppressed this expression as four-limb-powered flight became increasingly dominant. As generations passed, birds inherited bodies in which leg scales became the standard pattern, while the older developmental pathways remained inactive. Occasionally, those pathways become visible again. Certain domestic pigeon breeds develop thick coverings of feathers around their feet and lower legs. Some chicken breeds display similar traits, producing plumage where scales would normally be expected. These birds do not recreate the complete anatomy of four winged dinosaurs, yet they reveal that the underlying biological potential still exists. A small adjustment in developmental regulation can uncover features linked to a much earlier chapter of avian history. Studies examining genes involved in limb identity have identified important roles for regulatory changes affecting factors such as PIDX1. These developmental controls help determine whether a hind limb follows a more traditional, scaled pathway or expresses feather producing characteristics. The distinction emerges from patterns of gene activity during growth, demonstrating how evolutionary transformations can arise through shifts in regulation instead of entirely new genetic inventions. Such discoveries reveal a deeper continuity running through the history of life. Organisms are built from inherited frameworks that accumulate modifications across time. New adaptations emerge atop older foundations. Features may fade from view for millions of years, while their developmental blueprints persist within the genome. Viewed this way, the disappearance of four wings takes on a different meaning. The body plan itself vanished from the living world, yet elements of the biological architecture survived. They remain folded into the genetic inheritance of every sparrow, gull, owl, and albatross. The past is not stored separately from the present, it travels within it. Across the span from Microraptor to modern birds, evolution reshaped bodies, behaviors, and ways of moving through the air. Even so, the genome still carries faint signatures of routes once taken. Those signatures endure as enduring records of experiments conducted long ago, preserved within living descendants that continue the journey today. A shower of volcanic ash drifted through the forest air, settling across lakes, branches, ferns, and the countless lives moving through the landscape below. In that moment, one small predator was living out a routine day within a world that no longer exists. It climbed, hunted, searched for food, watched rivals, and navigated a canopy crowded with feathered creatures. Nothing in its surroundings suggested that more than 120 million years later, its remains would become one of the clearest windows into a vanished chapter of evolution. Microraptor inhabited a realm rich with opportunity. Fish moved through freshwater lakes. Lizards threaded between roots and fallen vegetation. Early mammals occupied sheltered corners of the forest floor. Primitive birds crossed openings in the canopy. Fossils have revealed evidence of this remarkable diet, preserving traces of prey from multiple habitats within a single animal. Few predators of its size possessed such ecological flexibility. It belonged to the forest as a whole, moving between layers of the environment with a versatility that helped make it one of the most successful hunters of its community. Sunlight passing across its plumage would have revealed feathers darker than ordinary black, structured at a microscopic scale to create iridescent reflections. Those feathers insulated its body, contributed to aerial performance, and served social purposes as well. Tail ornaments likely played a role in communication between individuals. Different feather groups carried different evolutionary histories, shaped by overlapping pressures acting simultaneously upon the same animal. The extraordinary conditions of the Jahal deposits preserve details almost beyond expectation. Feather impressions survived, stomach contents survived, pigment-carrying structures survived. Even nanoscale features associated with coloration endured through geological time. Such preservation transformed Microraptor from a simple fossil skeleton into a biological portrait, allowing researchers to reconstruct behavior, appearance, ecology, and evolutionary relationships with unusual confidence. Viewed from a broader perspective, Microraptor represents far more than a transitional form. The temptation to place it on a direct road toward modern birds obscures what the evidence actually shows. Four-winged dinosaurs persisted for tens of millions of years across multiple species and environments. Their body plan was stable, successful, and well suited to life among Mesozoic forests. They occupied a pathway that evolution explored extensively before that pathway eventually disappeared. For roughly 40 million years, nature maintained this experiment. Forest canopies hosted animals equipped with feathered forelimbs and feathered hindlimbs, combining climbing, gliding, maneuvering, display, and predation in ways unlike anything alive today. Then the lineage faded from the world. No modern equivalent emerged to replace it. The skies retained birds, but the four-winged hunters became part of prehistory. Even so, traces of their existence remain woven through living descendants. Developmental pathways linked to feathered hindlimbs persist within avian genomes. Fossils continue to reveal details hidden for millions of years. Each discovery adds another thread to a story stretching from Jurassic forests to the present day. The four-winged predators of the Cretaceous are gone. Their forests vanished, and their branches long since turned to stone. Yet every bird crossing a modern sky carries echoes of that deeper history. Within feathers, bones, and genes survives a distant reminder of a world where flight followed more than one path, and where Microraptor mastered one that would never appear again.